And we are sort of live, kind of live this time. We're
Kind
not
of live.
totally live, guys. So can't see y'all's in the chat. Y'all's are in a different time period. You're in the future.
Hello, future people.
Hello,
Is it?
people of the
Have we
future.
have we made it? Did we make it?
They are gazing upon these artifacts, these images of us from the past,
And our quaint views and thoughts.
as we greet our future Earthlings. Anyway, so tonight it's going to be a bit of a different topic. Tonight's topic is going to be about Theodore motherfucking Roosevelt, our former president. Now, let me just read off some stats about Teddy fucking Roosevelt.
Go for it.
He was, thank God for Wikipedia, am I right? He was president
He was.
from 1901 to 1909. He was the
Mhm.
26th president. Theodore fucking Roosevelt was originally the vice president under McKinley, I think,
Yep.
when he got assassinated.
Yeah, under
And then got
McKinley.
inaugurated and then got reelected and then lost. I think he lost one of the elections, right? The
He
last
did.
one?
Yeah, yeah, because originally he wasn't going to run
Yeah.
for another term, and then he came back and
Yeah.
did it as
Oh, poor guy.
he
He
ran
lost the
as the
election.
he did it as he created a third party, the Bull Moose Party, and
Yeah.
that's so yeah, we'll go back
We'll
into
get
some
there.
of the more details of his presidency later, but yeah, so yeah, he did lose that one.
So Teddy fucking Roosevelt
Mm-hmm.
was, in my opinion, was one of the fuckingest fucking presidents we've ever had. He
I
was
mean, I
quite
think that's one way of
spectacular.
saying it. Yeah, I mean,
I mean,
he
this
is
man was
definitely one of the
epic.
most influential.
I mean, just as a human being, he was epic, right?
Yeah,
Former
no,
cowboy, war hero,
war hero.
police commissioner.
Yep.
What else did he do? I don't know.
Conservationist.
Conservationist,
Again,
explorer.
a lot of the really impactful stuff comes out of politics, but it's
Oh
like
yeah, boxer.
boxer, judo wrestler.
And judo had just been invented by then, like
Yeah.
just been invented. Actually, no, sport judo I think wouldn't come about until like 1920. But he was learning jujitsu, like that old school Japanese shit,
Mm-hmm. Yes, he
while he
was.
was in the White House. Also survived an assassination attempt.
Yeah.
Also,
And by the way, his survival of the assassination wasn't because he ducked. He got shot. Look and just literally looked at the guy like, use a bigger bullet next time, and talked. He finished his speech.
oh yeah,
Now, part of it was that he did have like his speech already like the papers in his jacket, and that helps. Like it was a thick piece of paper, and it slowed the bullet. But he was shot. It wasn't like, oh, bulletproof vest. No, he was shot. There was a bullet in him. He literally grabbed a handkerchief, held it, and held the wound closed, and finished he went on like another 45 minutes on this speech. Then he went off the stage and got medical attention.
do you want to tell the folks at home about his war accomplishments?
Uh, Also, by the way, youngest president ever elected, at least to that
Yep.
point. I can't remember if Kennedy was
No, I
younger
think
than
he
him.
technically still is, or they're
Is he
close.
still? Yeah, they
Yeah,
were
I
real
think he
close, but he
technically
was
still
definitely the
is.
youngest at the time. Again, I'll let you hit up some of the highlights since you got Wikipedia. But again, San Juan Hill is
Hmm.
the charge that everyone knows him for because he
Yeah.
was Secretary of the Navy. He resigned being secretary so he could go fight in this war. And he created the Rough Riders. I mean, he didn't create cavalry. I mean, that had already existed, but he created this unit, and they were huge. It wasn't just San Juan Hill; it was
And
actually
he
two
straight
hills.
up by himself caught bad guys,
Yeah.
like
Oh, when he
cowboy
was
style,
police commissioner, when he
like
was police
straight up.
commissioner, the dude's basically Batman, and I mean this sincerely. I guess we're just going to go ahead and jump into some of this
Yeah.
before, because again, the presidential stuff that's going to take a little bit, but his wife and mother die on the same day.
Oh yeah.
He's a lot of people. It's like it seems weird to us because like, well, he leaves his daughter with her aunt, and he goes off to the west to become a cattleman. Right?
Yeah.
I was like, that's really weird. if you read his writings, a lot of people said, no, that's not really what's happening here. He's going to die. He's going into the wilderness. That's like the excuse, and that's what he's doing, but he is clearly trying to die. It's like suicide by work is what he was trying to do, because he had really bad asthma as a child.
Mhm.
And so he was very fragile. I know it's weird to think of him as fragile, but he was. And a lot of people, and finally some doctors were like, no, he needs exercise. He needs to be outdoors. So his father, because he was wealthy, the dude grew up wealthy. He was an
Yeah.
elitist. And his father built this whole gym for him to be exercising all the time. And he was out in nature all the time. He thought he was going to be a naturalist. But a lot of people said that his father was his father was amazing. He was a glass dealer, but he was very, very importer. He was very wealthy, but the dude was running all kinds of charities. By all accounts, he was one of the best. Like, people said straight up, he's one of the best people to have ever lived.
Hmm.
And the reason he seems to it looks like that Teddy gets into politics was because that's the one arena his father couldn't conquer. But if you read his writings, Teddy's like this, like, how do I live up to this man who is so amazing? Anyway, so he goes out to become a cattleman after his wife and mother die on the same day. He was very close with his mother. He goes out, and again, seemingly to sort of like suicide by work, but he finds the will to live. And literally, he's Batman. He comes back, ends up becoming, again, there's a lot of detail and nuance here, but he becomes police commissioner. The dude is on a bicycle in the middle of the night looking for crimes to stop. His number one thing was going after crooked police officers. Like, he really, like, I mean, even today, people in, like New York City, they look to Teddy Roosevelt as like the first police commissioner, because that was he sort of created this whole new enterprise. And he brought a lot of order and a lot of, he's like, no, people with political power, people with that the state
Yeah.
has given all this power, they need to be accountable. They need to be accountable. The
I heard
dude
one story.
is basically Batman. It's nuts.
I heard one story where he would take routine walks at night, like dressed in like disguise in different neighborhoods in New York, so that he can see which officers of his were like slacking or not patrolling or not watching that area. I mean, this dude was pretty hardcore.
It was nuts. The dude, and again, like you said, he was learning judo before it was cool. The dude he was a star pugilist, boxer. He went out of his way to, and this is and it forms a lot of his political stuff as well. He's there at the beginning of the progressive era, and a lot of people point him to him as a progressive, and I think that's a fair argument to be made in a lot of ways. But I think the problem is what we mean by progressive. I think the problem is there's a lot of negative connotations with the progressives because of what they would become, and really he was, I think, really to lump him in with the progressives is not unfair, but I think the problem is there's too much of context of what the progressives really were that he doesn't necessarily fit into. There are some stuff that bleeds over, like the eugenics. Like, he's not necessarily a eugenicist, but he's also not a eugenicist, if that makes any sense. Like, he's not anti-eugenics, right? He's a person of the time, but he's also not Margaret freaking Sanger, right? He's not, he would not necessarily have been down with forced sterilization, right? He believed that that political power needed to be used to make the lives better of the ordinary person, not just the political and financial elite. That was his thought. And really, a lot of the goodwill that the progressives have clung to is Theodore Roosevelt. Even though you would look at him, it's like, look, if y'all go to Teddy and say, here's all these thoughts and ideas, he'd shoot you. Because that is not what that's not really what he was. He was unique, though, for the time. And so much of his political power and the things that he does is in the service of the average man, and American political power around the world. like in particularly the Western Hemisphere.
But that was all prior to when American politics got really fucked up, right?
No, it's always been.
Yeah, but you were telling me off air when it started really
Oh
getting
yeah,
fucked
yeah,
up.
no, yeah,
Yeah,
no, yeah. Yeah. Woodrow Wilson is the worst president that we've ever had, and that needs to be his own. That
it
needs to
will
be
be
its
its
own
own
episode.
show, folks. It's coming, so
Yeah,
we'll get there.
because if Theodore, okay, so I would say Theodore Roosevelt isn't the most important, isn't the greatest president. That is literally George Washington. But if you want to talk about people who had the most impact on presidential power and politics, it is literally George Washington then Theodore Roosevelt. I mean, you can argue,
So
but
what
what
was
about
Theodore Roosevelt's? Oh, sorry, Teddy fucking Roosevelt's
yeah?
impact for people who
So
don't know their history or American early 20th century American political history.
and a lot of people say, well, hold on, but what about Jefferson with the Louisiana Purchase and the his use of the Navy? What about Adams's use of the Navy? Those kinds of things.
Hmm.
What about Lincoln? Again, very influential, always important. But what Theodore Roosevelt did in his presidency redefined the presidency. The way we view the president now is literally because of Theodore Roosevelt. The way we even view ourselves as Americans, in many ways, came out of him and what he was talking about, because he was aspirational. He created a lot of departments. He believed that the presidency. Okay, so you can argue that Lincoln was the first one to really, really make the presidency stronger than it was. Roosevelt said, I never changed any rules. I just applied them differently, is how he would see it. But
Okay.
he was very proactive as a president. He believed that the president was the leader of the country, which again, prior to this, that really wasn't the thought, right? We forget Thomas Jefferson had to wait while president, had to wait for a table at a restaurant. Most up into, again, you could argue, but like Lincoln, you could walk up into the White House, just an average person, and talk to Abraham Lincoln. There were security guards, of course, but like you could walk up and just be like, I need to talk to the president. They'd let you in.
Yeah. And there were
Like that's
stories of people like on the street who were like, anti-Civil War, who were straight up
yeah.
dicks to him.
Oh yeah. Like
Yeah.
the presidency was really not held in that high of a regard, because people, I think, I mean, rightly had the view like, you are our servants, you're not our leaders. But Teddy Roosevelt changes that idea in that relationship. He's like, I'm going to be the leader. I'm going to push these ideas. His doctrines that he sets up, particularly for Western Hemisphere and power in the Western Hemisphere, is literally what has shaped and created the sort of America world police,
Hmm.
that we've had for the last 100 years. That was him. He was the one who's like, you know what? Here's the problem. Isolationism is great, except for the fact when it comes back to bite us in the butt, and it does every time. So let's just go around the world. Let's go, particularly the Western Hemisphere, and let's make certain everyone's okay. And if you're not okay, we're going to make certain you're okay.
Yeah.
That was his view. Now, this is where a lot of interventionism comes in. The reason we have the Panama Canal was financially and as a sort of our status in the world. The Panama Canal was huge. It wasn't completed in his presidency, but he's the reason it happened. We supported Panama in their rebellion because we're like, you know what? We think we can get the Colombians won't let us build the Panama Canal, but these people who are rebelling, because technically Panama was a satellite of Colombia, it's like, if they win their freedom, they will let us do that. So let's do
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
Before the Panama Canal, if you were like in Europe or even just the Western United States and you wanted to ship your goods to the East, that's Japan, that's China, that's India, Australia, you had, or Europe to Europe to those places, you had to go around the bottom of South America and then sail back up. That's how you had to
Yeah.
get there. The Panama Canal opened up the East to trade in ways that it hadn't been opened before. And it created, and it sort of put us on the scene in many ways a lot more prominently than people realize. Also, he wanted to impress the empire. Again, people forget Japan was an empire. He strengthened our navy because he wanted the Japanese to understand that we were a force to be reckoned with, which is why we got Hawaii.
Yep.
Because he's like, no, we need Hawaii. We need a military base. Japan needs to understand that you can't just mess with us. And so this, and again, good or ill, right? I think the problem is it's not either. It's a little more nuanced. But the whole international interventionism, literally, he creates this idea. The idea that the United States government has an obligation to protect its people from, snake oil salesmen and all that all comes from him. And while national parks were a thing, and the National Park Service doesn't exist until Woodrow Wilson, worst president ever, which happens in 1916, Theodore Roosevelt doesn't create the national park system. National parks were already around, but he blew them up. He created way more national parks than ever happened, and he said, and I think this is one of those, again, it's a change in mentality. He said the nation had, and he's like, this is the idea the government should have, which is we cannot, he said it would be a sin, I'm going to blow the quote, but essentially it would be a sin for today's prosperity to deprive the future generation of all these natural wonders and resources. Like it was the stewardship idea. Like we need to be a steward of what we have. We have all these things. We need to be a steward of them.
I think people take our national parks for granted if they think about it in the grand scheme of things. Because if you look at other countries of equivalent size and population, like China or Russia or India, they don't have those kinds of services, and it shows, man. Because especially like places like China, where they just absolutely give zero fucks about the wilderness. They just don't give a flying fuck, right? You see the results. And America could have wound up like that, but we got our national parks.
Oh, look at Haiti. Like, great example of this is Haiti. There is no reason for Haiti to be what it is today. Like I just forgot the name of the other country. Like they're on the same island.
Dominican Republic.
Dominican Republic. They're the same. That's the same island, but you can see the difference from space. The Haitians after the revolution just destroyed everything, and they never, like, they're about as old as we are as far as a liberated colony. It's like us, Mexico, and Haiti are are roughly the same age, and you can see what they've done. We could have gone a very similar way without a lot of what he did, particularly in the 20th century. We've done things that have protected our national force and infrastructure, and like all these things that he put into place have kept us from going that direction. And as much as I'm a small government kind of guy, I don't necessarily like intervention, those kinds of things. The simple fact of the matter is there is a role to be played. And he kind of proves, like, if you don't do it, we can see how that goes.
Yeah.
And again, communist Russia is a great example of what you can do when there's no fetter on power. And when the power is directed to make the government better versus the people. And I think there's a lot that has been living off the fumes of Teddy Roosevelt. He redefined how we view ourselves. It's like, yes, we have power, but it should be used for the people, right? You should be holding people accountable. He set up a lot of the most important things he did was reforms, the same kind of reforms he started as commissioner of New York. He brought to the United States government, saying, we need to hold ourselves accountable for things that we do. Money that's spent. Again, have we lost our way in that? Yes. But he's the one who even brought the concept to government. And like you said, look at China, look at communist Russia, look at North Korea. Again, national parks, look at freaking North Korea. I mean, that's what happens when someone doesn't come, when power doesn't care about those things, when there isn't a sense of accountability, when there even just the illusion of accountability is enough to keep a lot of some of the really terrible excesses of humanity at bay.
Yep. I don't think America gets enough credit for its national parks and what it's done to preserve it, especially with all the development and everything on top
Yeah.
of that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can make fun of this country for a lot of things, but you also have to give credit where credit's due, and that
Yeah.
is definitely one of them.
Well, it's like I was thinking about your episode.
Yeah.
It was like 2 episodes ago with South Korea, in South Korea, that terrible boat
Yeah.
wreck. The where the guy asked you, he's like, "Are we still just a third world country?"
Hmm.
Right? And it's like that is something. Again, a lot of people haven't left the United States, and if they do, they've gone to like a hotel or like some
Yeah.
place where it's like, well, of course it looks beautiful. It's for tourists. They haven't seen the other world. When I was in Honduras, that's not where I was. Right? We went
Yeah.
to where it's like, oh, this is where they sell lard in the open air.
Yep.
This is where there isn't indoor plumbing at all, right? It's like you get to see how the world, when you see how the world really operates, and you're like, oh, these aren't police officers. This is just a mob.
Yep.
That's all it is. Like when
Oh,
you
hello,
see that,
abject poverty. Nice to meet you.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like it's real easy to get down on this country until you've actually seen how the world actually works, and you realize, oh, yeah, we're taking an awful lot for granted.
Yep.
And a lot of those things that we take for granted are either started directly or inspired by Teddy Roosevelt.
Yep.
He wanted to project this idea of robust. Uh, Again, even the interventionism, we can have comments about it, and there should be debates about it. But his whole point was, let's make certain our neighbors, because their neighbors affect us, let's make certain they're okay. That's literally the idea behind it. Was if you're okay, we'll leave you alone. If you're not okay, we're going to make sure you're okay. And again, how that's used over the next 100 years is debated. However, the mentality was, if we just stick to ourselves, it's really obvious that other people's problems affect us. And we have benefited from the fact that we have helped a lot of people with their problems. Like we benefit from, and I'm the first one to complain about, Team America World Police. But at the same time, the reason Europe has had the longest running period of peace until right now with Russia and Ukraine is us. The reason international trade is by and large safe, particularly on the water, is our Navy.
Hey, I
That's it.
wouldn't even exist if it weren't for the US, man.
Yeah.
I'd probably be born in North Korea if it weren't for the US.
Yeah.
But because of the US, I am here before you. And that is ultimately the greatest credit you could give the US and its greatest
Exactly.
accomplishment. It gave the world the gift
Of Donnie
of
Cho.
Donnie Cho.
Mm-hmm. Again, South Korea being what it is, as
Thank you,
prosperous
America.
and powerful as it is, that's because of us. Now, again, a
Really,
lot of
thank
South
you.
Koreans don't like that fact, but
Yeah, a
I'm
lot of
sorry.
South Koreans are kind of anti, but you know what? I could go into that because some of their justifications and logic, like they would get into these debates with me,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, okay, stop right there. I'm not exactly the biggest pro America rah rah kind of guy. I'm not, right? I'm not left
Mm-hmm.
or right. I don't consider myself either way. But some of your arguments are a bit fucking ridiculous. I mean,
Yeah.
get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, some of their reasons.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty. They're pretty stupid. Very stupid.
It's like without us, you're either going to end up being communist. Again, there wouldn't be
Yeah.
a North Korea; it would just be Korea, communist Korea, which makes you a satellite of China, or you would have just been a satellite of Japan. It's like,
Yeah.
help me out here.
You know what it
We
is
all
though?
know how that one played out too. So
A lot of the anti-American sentiment in places like Korea and Japan, a lot of it comes from like a lot of the U.S. soldiers
yeah,
coming over and acting a fool, and then getting charged for like
oh yeah,
murdering a girl or something, and that shit goes all over the headlines, and then people are
yeah,
like, "Yo, these fucking meathead American soldiers come in here and start ruining all this shit. Yeah, we want
Mhm.
them out of here. I get it.
Yeah. Oh, I get it.
I get it.
Yeah, it's
So
one of those things where again, not everything's necessarily black and white like we
yeah,
would like it to be. It's like, look, I understand why South Koreans wouldn't necessarily like the soldiers, right?
yeah,
I get it. At the same time, they're also why you have food,
yeah.
you
The
know?
ones I
So
didn't get at all were the ones who were like pro North Korean. I'm like, you've seen that country, right?
there's always I don't understand. I was actually listening to the fat electrician complain about this. It's like, what do we have to do? Like we've had the last century is the century of here's why communism doesn't work at all in any form, in any way. Here's your evidence. And there's still these morons running around going like, you know what? Let's give it another try. Maybe we just need one or two more genocides and
Maybe
we'll
Marx
figure it
was
out.
onto something. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. We just need a couple more genocides and we'll be fine. Like that's literally their thinking.
yeah.
Jordan Peterson said something I think very, very insightful. He says, whenever you hear someone say that's not real communism or that's not real socialism, what they are saying is it would have worked if I ran the gulags. That's all they're saying. And it's very, very telling. Honestly, I think that's one of those things we should all look at and go, okay, sociopath, we need to do something about you because that's legitimately it is an arrogance of, well, the world would work if I ran it because I'm pretty enough, I'm smart enough. If I ran the gulags, I'd make it work. But yeah, there's always like that's an everywhere problem. And usually it's someone who's wealthy or has come from a very privileged station in life. And
Yeah.
people are like, well, hold on. My friend over here is poor. And it's like, yeah, but you're poor in the United States. And that's very, very different world than being poor anywhere else.
I think I could run my own gulag and make it work.
Well, making a
Just
gulag
saying.
work isn't the issue. The question is, would you make it a can you turn a communist station into a prosperous and economy with happy and healthy subjects? And the answer to that is no.
Without avoiding abject corruption? Nah,
No,
nah,
that's not a yeah,
nah.
that's not
That's
a
not how that works.
it's not a bug, it's a
Yeah,
feature. And
yeah.
if you really want, again, go to the Fat Electrician's channel. Yeah, I'm going to pimp somebody else's channel on Donnie's channel.
How dare you?
But look up his thing on the Berlin Wall, and then there's another one about the Berlin airdrop. It's like it happened like 1 or 2 weeks before that one, so just
Mhm.
they'll be together. You really want to see how bad communism can get and told in a very funny way, go listen to that. That's like he lays it out very, very concisely. But yes, back to the original point. North Korea, wasteland because they're not going to protect the environment. China does have places where like we're not going to log here for a century because of the hardwoods, but they don't have national parks that are designed to keep things up.
Mm-hmm.
Russia wasn't even bothering with that. So again, yeah, very much the point of, and again, look at Haiti. Theodore Roosevelt said, hey, the natural world is precious and should be protected, and we need to take those steps to do it. And his influence essentially creates the National Park Service about 10 years later with Woodrow Wilson, worst president ever.
And so that leads us to our next, I guess, feature
Mm-hmm.
about the topic of Theodore motherfucking Roosevelt.
Mm-hmm.
Is the reason why he was so into, okay, let's at least agree that he at least had a part to play in establishing the National Park Services,
Oh,
right?
yeah, exactly.
Right. He got the ball rolling.
Yeah.
And obvious by looking at his life, you could see why, because he was in love with exploring. He went out into the
Mm-hmm.
wilderness, lived as a cowboy. Also, fun fact, after he lost his reelection bid,
Mm-hmm.
what did he do? I think he went big game hunting in Africa
Yes, he did for
for
a
like a
year.
year.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, he almost died in the Amazon.
Yeah.
Like homeboy straight up almost died. Like he was, I think 1 or 2 people actually did die in that
Yes, it was. Yeah.
expedition team.
Yeah.
And then he was trying to cross a stream and it cut his leg and it got infected and it got
Mm-hmm.
so bad where he was telling his own son, like, just leave me here, I'm gonna die, just leave me here. And the
Yeah.
son like had to drag his ass back, and he eventually made it. But I'm like, damn, right?
Like,
So
he got real close. Yeah, people don't
you can tell
understand.
this guy was like real into the outdoors, right?
Oh, yeah. No, he loved nature, and this is one of those things where, guys, I know it's very popular to hate on antibiotics and things like that. Please understand, antibiotics have made the again, we can argue about their misuse and misapplication, but people don't die the way they used to from simple, like, we call them simple cuts now. It's like
Man,
there was no such thing as a simple cut or a simple surgery 100 years ago. It
can
didn't
I
exist.
can I tell you a quick and painful story of mine?
Yes, please do. I always enjoy hearing you in pain.
This was, I think, back in 2008 or 2009. I had gotten an infection
Mm.
in my downstairs area.
You got the clap, didn't you?
The no, actually, I later found out what it was, and it was not any kind of STD or anything,
Mm-hmm.
because it was in like my let's just say some of the tubing in my balls area got infected.
I didn't need you. I was just giving you crap. He's like, no, like you could have stopped it. It wasn't an STD. It was just an infection. I didn't need to know that much, but okay.
Okay,
Your plumbing
so
was, so your plumbing had had got an infection. Okay.
I shit you not, it was the worst pain I ever felt in my life.
Oh, I
My
imagine.
how do I say it? What's the word? Balls enlarged to the size of grapefruits. And it was
Holy
like
crap!
every time I took a step or moved, it was like there was a little person. Oh, I'm sorry. Was I supposed to say midget? It was like there was a midget right between my legs, flicking me in the balls every time I took a step. It was that painful, right? And
Yeah.
I and so the what got rid of it was, when I got to the doctor and they took a look, they're like, Jesus Christ, right? Um,
Yeah.
so they realized, oh, it's just an infection of your epididymis or whatever it's called. And I was like, how did I get it? Was it from some? Did I have sex with the wrong person? What happened? And they're like, no, this is pretty common. It's just a random infection. Usually, it's
Yeah.
got nothing to do with sex. It's mostly just like
Mm-hmm.
it happened, right? And I was like, the reason why I'm telling you this story is, believe you me, those antibiotics, I was like, please. I was like, it was like manna from heaven. I
Yeah.
was like almost in tears when I had the first antibiotics in my hands. I was like, finally, hope,
I know
hope.
some. I know someone who actually very recently, they had just gotten sick, right?
Hmm.
And so that's where a lot of infections come from. It's not like you get the flu or whatever and then you get over it, but your immune system's already sort of hit, and then you get a secondary infection. It's completely unrelated. So that you've done anything, just your immune system can't handle it, and it turns into an infection. And they got essentially they originally thought it was a urinary tract infection. They were trying to treat it normally, but nope. It became a full blown bladder infection. We had to drive them to the emergency room
That
because
sounds super painful.
it was the most pain this person had been in their
Yeah,
life. And they
yeah.
said, the file said, we need to go now. This is painful. I'm like, okay, I'm going to drive them up there, because they couldn't even drive. That's how much pain they were. They're like, I need calls. Like, Jason, I need you to take me to the emergency room. I need to go. I can't drive. And yeah, within like 2 days after that, it actually, the first, like, they gave him some really, like, it was just
Hmm.
Tylenol or ibuprofen, was like really, really strong ibuprofen. But like, even after they gave him that first day with on the antibiotics, about midway of the next day, like, they were already starting to feel better. And after 2 days, they're like, it still hurts, but nowhere near as much pain.
Yeah, I remember with my ordeal, when I started going on the antibiotics, that shit was gone pretty quick.
Yeah.
Like 2 or 3 days, it was gone.
Yeah. And it's like,
And I remember,
you got to
yeah, I
finish out
remember I
the
got
course
like
to
my
really get
regular
it. Yeah.
floppy balls back, and I'm looking at them in the mirror. I'm like, oh, welcome back, guys. My little floppy balls are back.
Okay. Didn't need to hear that. But yeah. So yeah, no antibiotics. In fact, guys, antibiotics, you don't, again, if you've never lived in a world without antibiotics, you do not understand how
Oh, and
important they
once you
are.
start antibiotics, finish that shit. For
Finish it.
real. Don't be an
Finish it.
irresponsible moron and
Oh,
create the next generation of like superbug just because you're an
well,
asshole.
okay, so hold on. Actually, hold on. Here's the funny thing. They found out that the whole the drug resistant bacteria and all that,
Mhm.
not really necessarily that we're creating superbugs, because these
Mhm.
things actually did exist in nature before.
Mhm.
The thing is, the way antibiotics work is the shape of the bacteria
Yeah.
determines its efficacy. The problem is these other drug resistant strains already existed, but by taking out more of the strains that, because this will affect those strains that are
Mhm.
susceptible to the antibiotics. The problem is those are going away, so all we're getting left with is, it's not that we're creating, we're just creating. There's just now an environment for them to come in. So it's not necessarily that
Yeah.
they're superior, like they've gained
We're
powers.
we're so good at killing their competition that
That's what's, yeah,
yeah.
they're sort of coming in to fill the niche. But yeah, back to the point. Yeah, Home Dude nearly dies of an infection in the Amazon, and really, he probably should have died. Honestly,
Yeah,
that's
he probably
like,
should have died.
when you kind of read up what happens, like the fact that he survived, either God wasn't ready for him yet. It's like, I was just listening again, Bad Electrician. They were talking about Jake McNasty, literally the inspiration for the Dirty Dozen.
Mhm.
And he was asked, when he was much later in life, they said, how did you survive this? 'Cause, I mean, go again, Bad Electrician, go listen to Jake about the Jake
Yeah.
McNasty thing, and it's insane. World War II is full of insane people doing insane things. He said that he believed the reason, because he found God. I mean, at the end of his, actually after the war, he had a very self-destructive run after the war, but he finally got right with God, whole nine yards, right? But they asked him, how did you survive the story? Like, if you hear his story, it is insane. If you saw it in a movie, you wouldn't believe it. He said, honestly, I think it's just because God didn't have a place to put me. He's like, if he sent, if he sent me to
Yeah.
heaven, I'd goof it up. If he sent me to hell, I'd probably screw that up too.
Hmm.
It's like, geez, and go listen to the story. It is crazier than any comic book you've ever read in your life. And I'm saying this as a comic
Oh,
book fan.
that's the guy who would like get all mohawked up before going into
Yes.
battle? Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, I know that story. That
Yeah.
guy was nuts.
Dude was nuts. Like nuts. But anyway, the point is, Teddy Roosevelt should have died, but he comes back. He survives, comes back, and then he goes out again, because that's what he does. He loves nature. He loves naturalism.
And part of the reasons why we wanted to bring up Mr. Theodore fucking Roosevelt was because of his love of nature
Yes.
and his establishment of the national park services. But an interesting little caveat to that story is that he is probably the only president on
Mhm.
record to actually give an actual cryptid account.
Yes.
Probably Bigfoot. Most people assume it's Bigfoot,
Yeah.
but we don't really know. It could have
Mm.
been a dog man. A few years before his presidency, I think it was in like 1898 or something like that.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
comes out with this book called The Wilderness Hunter, which is basically kind of like a travel vlog of like his memoirs or his time in like the wilderness, not just his own, but collecting other people's stories.
Yeah.
And there's one story that he published in his own book. I guess it was like its own chapter,
Yeah.
where he tells the story of this one old ass prospector who's essentially spent his entire life living in the wilderness.
Hmm.
So Teddy Roosevelt was like, these guys don't fuck around. So if they're gonna tell you like a story, and he was
Hmm.
describing in his book about this guy was getting all emotional and shooken up, this grizzled ass dude
Hmm.
from like the late 1800s who's lived in the wilderness his whole life is getting all shook up recounting this story.
Yeah.
That's why Teddy fucking Roosevelt was like, yeah, I think this is pretty legit, right?
Yes.
And he made it clear that most mountain people, most wilderness people are not that superstitious.
Yeah. You can't be.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I fully agree with that because, people are superstitious in their own ways.
Right. But
Yeah.
so here's the thing to understand. Again, period. It's the period, right?
Mhm.
People forget how much changed because of the Age of Enlightenment. There was a lot of the reason the socialist movement in France was able to take off when it did was because there was this anti-superstition anti-spiritualism. At the same time, you have the spiritist movement showing up in Europe and in New York.
Mhm.
There was this sort of anti, there was this in this sort of sentiment of being anti-superstition, saying
Yeah.
there's no point in it. So a lot of people just kind of said, no, this is nature. Particularly the people who went out who became naturalists, and what they were trying to say, we can explain everything with science. So even mountain men and these prospectors, they were kind of going out with this mentality of, it's all just something we can observe and we can record, and all like that was a big push in that sort of late 1700s, through the 1800s mentality. So it sounds weird to hear that some mountain man isn't going to be overly superstitious, but it's an important point of, at that
Yeah.
time they wouldn't have been.
Yeah.
Again, doesn't mean they weren't like, hey, God exists, angels exist, things like
But he
that.
was very abundantly clear. They're not like full of shit, and there's nothing to
Yeah.
gain. This is like the late 1800s. It's not like they're going to go huge on YouTube or something, right?
Yeah, no, there isn't. There's no
Yeah.
point in telling this story
Yeah.
if it wasn't necessarily real. Again, people told tall tales, but our culture is so radically different from people, even just 100 years ago. They made it clear they understood what a tall tale was, right?
Yeah.
They knew what those stories, and again, they had purposes. And so when they're telling us, like, this is what happened to me, like, your word was your bond. If you lie about a story that happened to you, you couldn't be trusted with anything else. In your life in the wilderness depends on people's ability to trust you.
Yeah. And so the old man, I guess, recounts to him the story of his encounter with this cryptid. Again, sounds a lot like Bigfoot, where he tells about how when he was a younger man, he had
Mhm.
gone prospecting with his one partner.
Yeah.
I forgot the details of the story. I don't know if you remember this story. It's called the Bowman story. Apparently, the
Yeah.
guy's name was Bowman,
Yeah. Well, that's
and
the name that's ascribed to him anyway,
yeah.
because we'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, essentially the man is kidnapped by a Bigfoot and he lives with them for a while.
Oh
And
no, no,
then,
no! It's not that story. I know that story.
is it a different
No,
story?
no.
Okay.
The Bowman story is but that story did take place around that time. I think that was actually the most public story about
Mhm.
Bigfoot from that time period. The Bowman story is the guy basically tells him that he and his partner go into the woods, I think for prospecting. They set up camp, and while they're sleeping in their tent after the fire and everything, they see this thing kind of walking towards them, like, and standing outside their tent, right?
Yeah.
And like peering in. His partner gets all startled. He fires his shotgun at it. It seems like they hit it, but then the thing
Yeah.
just zooms off, right?
Yeah.
So the next morning they see the tracks. The guy goes looking for it. Meanwhile, the other guy's back at camp, right? The old man retelling the story is the one who
Right.
went looking for the tracks to try to figure out what it was, because the footprints didn't make sense. And he was very clear that it was definitely bipedal. It ain't no goddamn bear, because they know what bears look like. Trust
Yeah.
me, these people lived in the woods the whole life, right? And he said it was hell no, it was no bear, but it wasn't a man. It was on 2 feet. He went looking in the woods. Eventually, the track stopped. He turns around, comes back, finds his partner with his neck snapped.
Yeah.
And then the whole place had been trounced. Like after it snapped his neck, it just went buck wild and started trouncing around all over the camp.
Yeah.
So this thing came back and snuck up behind the dude when his partner left, basically twisted his head in place.
Yeah, I was
That was
confused in the
about,
story because
yeah,
the story I was thinking of happens in like the late 20s, early 30s. But yeah, that's the one where, the one that Roosevelt recounts. As long as
yeah.
at least I didn't say it was the one that Crockett had.
So I know
Yeah,
that story pretty well. That
yeah,
was a pretty gnarly story too.
that was an early story. But yeah, so I mean, this is one of those accounts, and a lot of so it goes back to if the story is as Roosevelt presents it, which is, I met a man who told me this story. It's very convincing. It really is. A lot of people, though, have looked at it and said, this is kind of a lot of detail that Roosevelt's putting in this book. And they think there's a theory out there. There's no way to prove it one way or the other. But that the Bowman story is actually it's actually Teddy Roosevelt's story, that this was him, and that the reason he created the sort of prospector veil
Mhm.
was so that people wouldn't call him crazy for having this happen to him. But there's a lot of people who think that the story of the old prospector and all of that
Mhm.
is actually it was a veneer put up by Roosevelt to hide the fact that this was his encounter. I think the counter argument is Roosevelt just could have listened. The guy could have been a good storyteller, and he got the details right. Like that's fair. I think it's kind of because I think if you're hearing this story and you're talking to the guy, you're going to ask him questions that allows you to get the details right. So I think I'm not sold on the story on this theory, but there's a big but the argument's not isn't unsound to suggest that maybe this is actually him recounting his encounter, but he's sort of thrown up this veneer as a way of protecting and shielding himself from ridicule.
I don't know. I would have to read the rest of the book to get my own thoughts on that, you know?
Well, I mean,
Because that's I think I
there are
really know the
accounts from
book
other
more.
people. Like
Yeah.
again, that's what I'm saying. Like I don't. The reason I'm not sold on it is because it would be one thing if there were no other stories from other people in the book, right?
Mhm.
Um, and at least as far as the official record goes, there isn't necessarily a friend of his that But again, that goes back to, but that's just what's on the record. It's not like we've got every record that's ever happened, right?
Yeah.
And if he doesn't really put it down, hey, this is again, if he changes enough of the details so that it's not necessarily easy, it's like, well, hey, this guy died because of dysentery or whatever, which is why you should never diss Terry Crews. But it's like if one guy's death is put down as dysentery, then everyone kind of comes back and says, okay, it's what it was. It could still be, or he falls or whatever. Like again, people died all the time. It's very possible that this was something that happened to him, and he's creating this veneer to protect his reputation. I'm just not 100% sold on that theory. I think it's worth accepting and taking it sort of face value because
Mhm.
there just isn't a good reason to necessarily. I think the problem is it's not an invalid theory. The problem is there just isn't enough to support that theory. It's a theory born out of we'd like for that to be the case.
It would be cool. It would be pretty cool if that were the case.
But the point still stands. Um, Teddy says it happened to somebody else. I think we take it at face value. But the bigger importance is this was an event documented a century, well, not a full century because it was the 1960s, but 50, 60 years before Bigfoot becomes a thing. So it's very
Mhm.
hard, for people to say, "Oh, Bigfoot's just a modern myth." It's like, well, if it's a modern myth, and I think there's a valid criticism of the wild man mythology exists in all cultures. It seems to be one of those, sort of cultural universal themes, right? That's fair. The problem is we have a number of accounts from the late 1800s, early 1900s of people encountering a large bipedal creature in the woods. Teddy Roosevelt is writing of one of these accounts. It makes it very hard it's really hard to say this thing can't exist if people have been seeing it and documenting it for the last century. Just the fact the name Bigfoot pops up in the 60s and the guy around the name Bigfoot was clearly faking it, right?
Mhm.
That's fair. However, the problem is that's just the name. That's not the phenomena itself. And so this thing has been around for a long time. And Teddy, it's like this is a well documented event presented to us long before this has ever been, before the Bigfoot
Yeah.
craze was ever a thing.
By the
And that's
president.
yeah, by the president,
Well,
yeah, by the
by the future president.
future president of the United States.
Yeah.
It's something that should be taken seriously and is one of those nice little pieces on the board. Where you're like, yeah, if Bigfoot's a modern thing, it's just a modern convention. Explain that. Because the other big thing about this, again, this is one of those reasons why I still think that there is a reason to suggest there is a physical Bigfoot, right? That I do think a lot of the encounters that are described, a lot of things people are talking about are supernatural in nature. But the reason I still point to, hey, there can be a physical aspect to all of this is a story like this. There's no supernaturalism in the story at all. It's just a creature that they pissed off, and it came back for a little payback, and then went and left physical evidence, and then went about its merry way, right? They're following tracks, comes back, kills the dude, trashes the camp, and then leaves. Now, I'm not saying a supernatural being couldn't do that, but what I'm saying is that's more suggestive of a physical creature that's just pissed off than, a supernatural entity wanting to have a field day, right? There's usually other supernatural phenomena that occurs in stories where I'm like, that sounds more supernatural, right? Like it talks to them, or
Yeah.
there's other paranormal events, right?
Yeah. Or there's weird glowing orbs and stuff,
Yeah,
right?
weird glowing
Yeah.
orbs, or we heard the voice of our loved ones, our dead loved ones,
Yeah.
like something, right? There's
Yeah.
something else that says, hey, this is probably shouldn't be taken as a physical creature just doing its physical creature things, but this does. Again, if he had said this was the story of a bear, there's no outside, and the dude had been mauled to death, we wouldn't think twice about this being a real story. And it would be consistent. Like, you shot it, it got pissed off, left, but then came back and wanted one little payback, kills one of them, kills the guy, and then trashes the camp. We'd be like, yeah, okay, cool. I mean, we'd move on. Wouldn't think twice. So it's very consistent with a living, breathing creature that just didn't like the fact that it got shot at.
Yeah, and then they just decided to come along and twist this dude's head off.
Yeah. Well, broke it. Which, again, that detail is really important because we see a lot. There's well documented evidence of deer being killed by having their neck literally like spun around, like something grabbed their head or their antlers and broke the neck. Like, we find this. That's not something that, when a big cat, particularly here in the Americas, when a big cat kills a deer, that's not how they're killing it. But we find them where there's a long running, documented cases of deer where their neck has been snapped, like right here. So the fact that this guy is killed by his neck being broken, again, documented in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that's very, very telling because we can see evidence of something in the woods doing that today. So it's that consistency that's really, really important. It would be one thing if it's like, yeah, he killed the guy by ripping him in half. Okay. At that point, I'm like, that sounds like sensationalism at the very least. But he doesn't. No, he spun his neck around. Okay. Interesting, because we have deer where that has happened. It's documented. So we got to start asking, is this not some of the most important evidence of Bigfoot? But now let me ask, can I get a little conspiratorial with you?
Okay.
All right, let me ask you this question. If we, again, like I said, I'm not a proponent of the theory, but let's play a little bit for a second. If it was to Teddy Roosevelt that this happened to, is it possible that encounter is actually the reason why he wanted to create the Park Service or these national parks? Was we need to give them a place to be away from humans because these things are physically superior to us and dangerous, and they should be respected?
If that were the case, Jason,
Mm-hmm.
if that conspiracy theory were the case, that maybe Teddy Roosevelt did have that experience, and maybe that is what shaped his decision to kick this whole National Park Forest Service into motion. If that were the case, then that particular Bigfoot, we'll call him Bob.
Bob.
Yeah. Bob may be the most influential and important Bigfoot of all time because Bob, in twisting that dude's head off, may have influenced a man, which would lead to a course of events that has preserved all the major national forests in this country.
There you go. Maybe he didn't really want to preserve nature for the next generation. He was trying to keep us safe from what's in it.
So is the most important person in this story Teddy fucking Roosevelt, or is it Bob?
In this one narrow slice, I think you got to give it to Bob.
That one Bigfoot saved all the forest, all the homes for all the other Bigfoots. Then,
and all the other fuzzy woodland creatures.
see, last night on an episode, on one of these paranormal shows, I was in a chat room and people were talking about how Bigfoot could be the protector of the forest, right? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
could he be the protector? And I was like just joking around, and I'm just like, well, if if his job is actually protector of the forest, then he's doing a pretty fucking lousy job at it, right?
Yeah.
Because I ain't never seen Bigfoot stop no bulldozers before.
Well, there has been a claim that it did happen once, but again, it's a once thing, right?
Right.
It's not like you said; they're not out there stopping developers and on the regular.
But if your conspiracy theory about Teddy fucking Roosevelt being the experiencer, and maybe that's what caused him to launch all the national parks,
Mm-hmm.
in that case, Bob may be the greatest protector of the forests of them all.
Maybe they are, and he just happened to do the job better than anyone else, and maybe that's why he's spared. All right, let's go full woo on this. He
Okay.
saw the future that Teddy Roosevelt had as president of the United States. He could feel the divine intervention on Teddy Roosevelt and said, I'm going to make certain this man knows the power of the forest and will protect us.
Maybe he struck up an agreement.
That was the idea.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
he's like, you're going to
He's like,
become president because McKinley was assassinated. Maybe that assassination was actually set up by Bob the Bigfoot so that Theodore Roosevelt would become president. And that was the deal. That was the Faustian bargain made by Teddy Roosevelt.
oh yeah, because that assassination attempt, that was before he became president. That's what caused him to become so popular, because people were like, what a badass this guy was.
No. McKinley being assassinated is why he became president. He was supposed to become, remember, he was vice president. In the Republican Party, particularly the Northeastern Republican Party, didn't like him. Which is why they made him.
Didn't McKinley get shot at like the train station? Was that him?
Yeah,
or was
like he was
the
only like he dies a few days into his presidency.
Yeah,
So
I remember.
Yeah, so Theodore Roosevelt may have struck up a deal with Bob the Bigfoot, and that's why he became president. And his end of the bargain was the national parks to protect the Bigfoot and give them a home. And then perhaps they blessed him for that. And that's why he seemingly survives all of these impossible situations throughout his life.
And maybe Bob the Bigfoot's family, because of the national parks and everything being protected lands, his family spread. His descendants spread throughout the land. Now you see skunk ape in Florida. You see Bigfoot up in the Pacific Northwest, in Kentucky and Tennessee and Texas, of all places. What?
Yeah.
First time I heard about Bigfoot in Texas, I was like, huh? I thought Bigfoot was just a Pacific Northwest thing. No, they're everywhere. You got Bigfoot in Michigan, Bigfoot sightings in Pennsylvania.
Ohio.
Could they all be the descendants of Bob? And could Teddy fucking Roosevelt be the one who facilitated their spreading?
Could it be he was the one who struck the negotiation that people who go into the national parks can become fair game?
Man, you're going into some dark territory, my friend, because now we're talking about like missing people.
Missing 411, maybe.
Think that Teddy fucking Roosevelt had anything to do with that.
I don't think he would have. Let's be honest. Look, the simple fact of the matter is, whether he was actually the one who encountered the Bigfoot or not, the man had a love of nature from very, very early on. And could this story have said, look, maybe we can put it in the thought in his mind. It's not just that nature needs to be protected. Maybe we need to protect ourselves from nature, and giving a place for nature to be that's separate from us is probably the wisest decision moving forward. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to say that perhaps he realized that there are things out there that are best being left alone. Because as much as he's like, let's go out there and let's conquer everything, because he did. That was his thought. That was his thought process. At the same time, maybe he also understood some things probably just shouldn't be messed with from time, and we need to give these things its room. I mean, that's not an unreasonable position. Again, I don't think
Yeah.
he talked to the Bigfoot. I don't think he made people are
No,
gonna be
I think so.
legit.
Like,
Yeah.
if your conspiracy theory is true,
Hmm.
then maybe he was all gung ho about conquering the wilderness until one fateful day he
He learned
met
that perhaps there are places we shouldn't go.
he met Bob, and Bob changed his life. Remember that scene in the original Ben-Hur when he finally meets Jesus?
Oh
It was like
yeah,
one of those moments,
yeah,
right? Where Teddy fucking Roosevelt looks up and it's a Bigfoot, right? And there's Bob standing in his majesty.
yes.
And then Bob looks at his buddy. He's like, "Yeah, your buddy's got to go.
But I'll spare you because I can
I'll
feel the
spare
divine
you."
intervention on your life.
Okay, I think we can leave it at that, folks. Instead of hitting the end recording button, Jason, I am going to take us off the stream. So I want the future people
The
at
future
home,
people.
to bear witness to this background in all its majesty, because it's one of my favorite personal paintings. No, not my personal paintings. I didn't
I
paint
know,
it
but
personally, but it's
personally,
my
you
favorite
love it. Yeah.
personally. Yeah, I didn't paint that. No, I can't paint for shit. So, future people, I'll see you in the future. And to Donnie Cho in the chat, stop acting like an asshole, Dick.
Yeah.
I know he's in there in the chat listening right now.
Yeah. And
Future
he's,
Donnie.
yeah,
That guy's a
future Donnie's
fucking
definitely being a
asshole.
dick. Yeah.
All right. I will give you guys a few seconds with this picture.